The night my stepfather called me a freeloader in front of 26 relatives, he thought he was giving me 30 days to leave my grandmother's mansion, but what he did not know was that 2 years earlier, my grandmother had already signed the house over to me. He stood at the head of the dining table in Rosewood Manor with a glass of Cabernet in one hand and an eviction notice in the other, smiling like a man who had practiced cruelty until it looked like leadership. "Claire," Victor Hale said, loud enough for every aunt, cousin, neighbor, and polished guest in the room to hear, "You have lived under this roof long enough without contributing anything real. It is time you learned that memory does not pay property taxes." A few people looked down at their plates. A few pretended to sip wine. My stepsister Vanessa did not even try to hide her smile. She sat beside her husband in a pearl-colored dress, her blonde hair swept perfectly over one shoulder, watching me the way someone watches a stain being removed from expensive fabric. I was standing near the end of the table in the same black dress I had worn to my grandmother's funeral 3 weeks earlier, one hand gripping the back of a chair, the other still smelling faintly of the white roses I had arranged for the centerpiece, because I could not bear to let strangers decorate Eleanor Whitmore's house as if she had never lived in it. Rosewood Manor stood on the edge of Charleston's old money district, behind an iron gate and 2 ancient live oaks draped in Spanish moss. The house had 3 porches, a marble foyer, a library with a rolling ladder, and a greenhouse where my grandmother taught me the difference between flowers that bloomed for attention and flowers that survived because their roots knew what they were doing. To the rest of the family, it was an asset. To Victor, it was a solution to debts he never admitted out loud. To Vanessa, it was a stage she believed she deserved. To me, it was the last place on earth where I could still hear my grandmother's voice. "Victor," I said carefully, because anger had never helped me in that house. "Grandmother told me she did not want Rosewood sold." Vanessa gave a soft laugh, delicate and sharp. "Grandmother also told you to water orchids with ice cubes when she was on pain medication." Not every sentence from a sick woman becomes a legal command. Her words moved through the table like perfume, pretty enough for people to pretend it did not poison the air. My mother Marianne sat across from me in a navy dress, her face pale beneath her makeup. She looked older than 56 that night. Maybe silence ages a person faster than grief. Her eyes met mine for half a second, wet and pleading, then dropped to the folded napkin in her lap. That had always been our family's arrangement after she married Victor, he decided. Vanessa performed, mother endured, and I absorbed what no one else wanted to name. "This is not about sentiment," Victor continued, setting the wineglass down. "This is about responsibility. Rosewood Manor is too large, too expensive, and frankly too wasted on old habits. Preston Blake has made a generous offer." The man seated 2 chairs from Vanessa inclined his head as if generosity were a business credential. Preston Blake owned boutique hotels from Savannah to Palm Beach, the kind of places where guests paid $700 a night to sleep beneath restored ceilings and call it history. He had been introduced as a friend of the family, though I had never seen him before that evening. Now he looked around my grandmother's dining room with the hungry politeness of a man already imagining where the check-in desk would go. "The property has tremendous potential," Preston said. "Properly handled, it could become one of the finest heritage hospitality destinations in Charleston." "Heritage hospitality," I repeated. "You mean hotel rooms?" Vanessa rolled her eyes. "You always do this, Claire. You reduce everything to make everyone else look heartless. Someone has to remember this was her home." "And you made that home your entire personality?" Vanessa snapped, leaning forward. "You stayed here because it was easy. You watered plants, rearranged furniture, read books to an old woman, and acted like that made you noble. The rest of us built lives." Heat rose in my face, but beneath it was something colder. I had not stayed because it was easy. I had stayed when grandmother's hands began trembling too much to button her blouses. I had stayed when she forgot the names of neighbors but remembered every crack in the greenhouse glass. I had stayed through nights when she woke afraid that Victor had moved papers from her desk. Through mornings when I found her sitting in the library with one hand pressed over her heart, whispering that some people waited for a woman to weaken before they started calling theft a plan. I had stayed because love, unlike inheritance, required showing up before there was anything to gain. "I took care of her," I said. Victor's expression hardened, not because he disagreed, but because he hated any truth that did not serve him. "You were allowed to remain here while Eleanor was alive because it comforted her. That does not entitle you to the house." "I never said it did." "Good," he said, and lifted the paper in his hand. "Then this should not be difficult. He walked down the length of the table, past silver candlesticks and untouched plates of shrimp and grits, and placed the notice in front of me. The paper looked absurdly white against the polished mahogany. 30 days, he said. You will vacate the upstairs bedroom, the studio over the carriage house, and any personal items stored in the greenhouse or library. We will provide a moving allowance if you cooperate. The word cooperate made Vanessa smile again. My cousin Lila stared at the paper, horrified but quiet. Aunt Patricia pressed her lips together. No one spoke. That was the deepest wound of the evening, not Victor's arrogance or Vanessa's contempt, but the sound of people choosing comfort over decency in real time. I looked at my mother. Her hand had risen halfway from the table, then stopped as Victor glanced toward her. Slowly, she lowered it again. Something in me went still. You are evicting me from my grandmother's house at a dinner you called to honor her memory? I asked. Victor sighed as if I had disappointed him by noticing. No, Claire. I am asking an adult woman to stop hiding inside grief. You are 34 years old, no husband, no steady career, no property, no savings that anyone can see. You cannot keep living like a dependent child and expect the world to call it devotion, Vanessa murmured. Exactly. That small word did what Victor's speech had not. It cut through the last thread of hope I had that one person in that room might remember who I had been to Eleanor. I stood straighter. Grandmother would never have allowed this. Victor's face changed then. The refined mask slipped, just enough for me to see the panic beneath it. Your grandmother is gone, he said, each word clipped clean. And while you keep clinging to things she supposedly whispered to you in the dark, the rest of us are dealing with reality. Preston shifted in his chair. Perhaps this conversation would be better handled privately. No, Victor said, still looking at me. Claire has spent years confusing privacy with entitlement. Let everyone hear it clearly. She is not the owner. She is not the decision-maker. She is not the guardian of this family's legacy. She is a guest who forgot guests eventually leave. A thin laugh escaped from someone near the sideboard. Vanessa covered her smile with her glass. My mother closed her eyes. The chandelier above us threw warm light across portraits, crystal, silver, and the white roses I had arranged with my own hands. For a moment, I saw the room as my grandmother must have seen it near the end. Beautiful, expensive, crowded with people who admired the house and underestimated the woman who built her life inside it. Then I remembered her voice from 6 weeks before she died, raspy but firm, calling me close in the library. If they ever try to put you out, Claire, look behind the rose painting. Not the small one. The one your grandfather hated because it was too pink. At the time, I had thought she was drifting between memory and morphine. Now Victor's eviction notice sat in front of me, and that strange instruction returned with the force of a key turning in a lock. I picked up the paper. Vanessa's eyes brightened, thinking I was about to fold. Victor nodded once, pleased with the obedience he thought he had finally forced out of me. I looked at the notice, then folded it neatly in half and set it beside my plate. 30 days, I said quietly. That is generous, Victor replied. No, I said, lifting my eyes to his. It is unnecessary. The room sharpened around us. Victor frowned. Excuse me? I pushed back my chair. You said paper matters. Tomorrow, I am going to find the paper grandmother wanted me to see. Vanessa laughed outright. Listen to yourself. This is embarrassing. Maybe, I said. But not for me. Victor stepped closer, lowering his voice into something dangerous. Do not test me in my house. I looked past him, toward the library doors, toward the wall where the rose painting waited in the dark. For the first time that night, I almost smiled. That is the thing, Victor, I said. I am not sure it is your house at all. I did not leave the dining room immediately, because leaving too quickly would have looked like fear. And after 34 years of being treated like the soft place where everyone could press their cruelty, I had learned that sometimes the only power you have is the pace of your own exit. Victor stared at me as if he were deciding whether to shout. But Preston Blake's presence held him in place, forcing him to keep the polished mask on his face even while his eyes sharpened with warning. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, still amused, still certain that my small act of resistance would become another family story about Claire making grief dramatic. Go ahead, she said lightly, lifting her wine glass. Search the walls for magic papers. Maybe Grandma hid a crown behind the drapes too. A few people laughed because people like Vanessa made mockery feel safer than sympathy. I looked at her, then at the eviction notice folded beside my plate, and something in me finally stopped asking that room to be kinder than it was. "Enjoy dinner," I said, and walked out before my voice could betray me. The hallway beyond the dining room was dim, lit only by the sconces grandmother had chosen in Paris 30 years earlier, their amber light trembling against the old wallpaper. Behind me, conversation resumed in a lower register. Not quite comfortable. Not quite ashamed. I could hear Victor explaining that emotions were expected after a death, that I had always been fragile, that the sale would be handled responsibly. He was already rewriting the moment while I was still within earshot. I climbed the back staircase instead of the grand one because the grand staircase passed too close to the dining room doors, and I could not stand the thought of Vanessa watching me like entertainment. The back stairs smelled faintly of lemon oil and dust, a smell that belonged to Rosewood, as much as the gardenia bushes by the gate or the salt air that came off the harbor in the early mornings. Every step carried a memory. I had run up those stairs at 12 after breaking my mother's favorite porcelain bowl. I had carried trays down them at 29 when grandmother's appetite failed and she would only eat soup if I pretended not to worry. I had sat halfway up them at 32, listening to Victor argue with her behind the library doors, his voice low and urgent, hers thin but unbending. "You cannot keep letting sentiment dictate the future," he had said. "And you cannot keep mistaking my house for your solution," she had answered. I reached the upstairs landing and went to my room first. Not because I needed anything there, but because I needed one private minute before stepping into whatever grandmother had left behind. The room was small by Rosewood standards, tucked at the end of the east hall, with pale blue curtains, a narrow writing desk, and the same iron bed I had slept in during childhood summers. It had never been my mother's idea of a suitable adult bedroom. Vanessa once called it the charity wing, laughing as if the house itself agreed with her. But grandmother had always said the east room caught the honest light. I closed the door, leaned against it, and pressed both hands over my mouth. Only then did the dinner reach me fully. Freeloader, guest, dependent child, 30 days. Not the owner, not the decision-maker, not the guardian of this family's legacy. I let the words strike once, then forced myself to breathe through them. Victor had always known which wound to press. He knew I had no expensive title, no husband with a firm handshake, no house with my name on the mailbox, no social circle that measured worth in invitations. I had freelance design contracts, old furniture I restored in the carriage house studio, a portfolio nobody in my family took seriously, and 3 years of unpaid devotion they had decided to rename convenience. But grandmother had known too. She had seen the shape of the attack before it arrived. Look behind the rose painting, not the small one. The one your grandfather hated because it was too pink. I wiped my face, opened my drawer, and took out the small brass flashlight I used when the greenhouse lights flickered. Then I removed my heels. Because Rosewood's floors spoke when people crossed them carelessly, and walked barefoot down the hall. The library sat on the west side of the house, past the portrait gallery and the closed door of grandmother's bedroom. I stopped there for a moment. Her room had not been touched since the morning she died. At least not by me. The door still carried the faint scent of lavender lean-in spray and the peppermint balm I rubbed into her hands when arthritis made her fingers curl. I wanted to go in. I wanted to sit on the edge of her bed and be a granddaughter for 5 more minutes before becoming whatever the night required. But downstairs, silverware still clicked, and Victor's voice still traveled through the walls, and grief would have to wait its turn behind survival. I continued to the library. The room was dark except for moonlight spilling through the tall windows. Spanish moss shifted outside like old lace in the wind. Shelves rose from floor to ceiling, filled with leather-bound histories, garden journals, and the detective novels grandmother pretended she only read when she was too tired for serious literature. The rose painting hung above the fireplace. A large oil canvas of pink garden roses in a blue vase, too bright, too sentimental, too alive for the solemn mahogany room. My grandfather had hated it, she told me once, because he thought flowers that pink belonged in a powder room, not a library. She kept it there for 40 years after he died. A woman should keep at least one thing in the house simply because a man complained about it, she had said. I dragged the small ladder from the shelves, climbed carefully, and shone the flashlight along the frame. At first, I saw nothing but dust. Then my fingers found a small strip of newer wood fixed behind the lower edge, almost invisible unless someone knew to look. My pulse climbed into my throat. The painting was heavy, and for one terrifying second I thought I would drop it and bring the whole house running. but I managed to lift it from its hooks and ease it onto the carpet. Behind it, set into a shallow cutout in the wall, was a flat metal document case wrapped in brown paper and tied with black ribbon. My name was written across the front in grandmother's sharp, elegant hand. Claire Elise Donovan. Not Claire Hale. Never Hale. Donovan. The name I had before Victor entered our lives and began editing the family around himself. I sat on the floor with the case in my lap, unable to open it at first. The library seemed to hold its breath around me. Finally, I untied the ribbon. Inside was a sealed envelope, a folded packet of photocopy or legal pages, and a business card for Thomas Whitaker, attorney at law, King Street, Charleston. On the back of the card, grandmother had written, "Trust Thomas. He has the originals." I opened the letter first. "My dearest Claire, if you are reading this, then Victor has done what I expected and what I am sorry I did not stop loudly enough while I still had breath. Do not let his suit fool you. A well-dressed man can still be a trespasser in another person's life. He will tell you that you have no claim to Rosewood because he needs you ashamed before you become curious. Vanessa will call you dependent because she has never understood the difference between taking shelter and giving care. Your mother may stay silent, not because she does not love you, but because fear has been teaching her bad habits for too long." I read the line about my mother twice, and the anger in me softened just enough to hurt. Grandmother continued, "Listen carefully. Rosewood Manor is not Victor's to sell. It has not been his to manage for years. 2 years ago, while I was fully competent and against the advice of those who prefer women to make convenient choices, I transferred ownership of the house, the carriage studio, the greenhouse, the garden parcels, and all remaining household rights to you through a recorded deed. Thomas Whitaker holds the originals, the filing confirmation, and the physician's statement proving I knew exactly what I was doing. The copy in this case is only for your courage. The originals are for the law." My vision blurred. I unfolded the photocopied pages with trembling hands. The words were legal, dense, formal, but I understood enough. Grantor, Eleanor Louise Whitmore. Grantee, Claire Elise Donovan. Property, Rosewood Manor, including residence, grounds, carriage house, greenhouse, and appurtenant rights. I stared at my name until the letters seemed to lift from the page. All those years, Victor had made me feel like a tolerated object in a room he controlled. All those years, Vanessa had acted as if the floors rejected my footsteps. All those dinners where relatives asked when I planned to start my real life, never noticing that I was bathing grandmother, balancing her medications, keeping her roses alive, and holding the house together while Victor circled it like a banker with a smile. Grandmother had not left me a promise. She had left me proof. A sound came from the hallway. I froze. The letter open in my lap. Footsteps slowed outside the library doors. I snapped off the flashlight and held my breath. The handle turned once, gently. Then Victor's voice came through the wood, quiet and close. "Claire?" I did not move. Another pause. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be." His footsteps lingered for a moment, then moved away down the hall. I waited until silence returned before gathering the papers, replacing the painting as carefully as I could, and pressing the document case against my chest. I did not go back to my room. I went down the servants' stairs, out through the side door, and into the cold garden where the white roses glowed like ghosts under the moon. With shaking fingers, I dialed the number on Thomas Whitaker's card. A man answered on the 4th ring, his voice rough with sleep but instantly alert when I said my name. "Claire," he said, as if he had been expecting this call for years. "Did Victor try to remove you from the house?" I looked back at Rosewood Manor, at the lit windows, at the family still dining beneath my grandmother's roof, at the man upstairs who had just warned me not to make things difficult in a home he did not own. "Yes," I whispered. Thomas exhaled slowly. "Then your grandmother was right. Come to my office at 7 in the morning. Bring the copy, bring the letter, and Claire, do not sign anything tonight." I already refused. There was a brief silence. Then something like approval entered his voice. "Good. Eleanor said you would be frightened, but not foolish." I almost cried then, not from fear, but from the sudden impossible comfort of being known accurately by someone who was gone. When I ended the call, the garden wind moved through the roses. And for the first time since the funeral, Rosewood Manor did not look like a place I was about to lose. It looked like a witness waiting for morning. By 6:30 the next morning, Charleston had not fully awakened, but Rosewood Manor already felt like a house holding its breath. I had spent the rest of the night in the carriage studio instead of my bedroom, sitting among fabric samples, half-restored chairs, and boxes of grandmother's old design books with the metal document case on my lap. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard Victor's voice outside the library door. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be." The sentence had followed me through the dark like a hand reaching for the back of my neck, but by dawn, fear had changed shape. It had not disappeared. It had simply become useful. I dressed quietly in a navy skirt, cream blouse, and the only blazer I owned that did not still smell like varnish from the studio, then slipped the photocopied deed, grandmother's letter, and Thomas Whitaker's card into a leather folder. The house was silent when I crossed the garden toward the side gate. The white roses were damp with morning mist, their petals heavy, their stems stubborn. I paused beside the largest bush, the one grandmother had called Eleanor's folly because everyone told her roses would never bloom well that close to the salt air. She had proved them wrong for 27 years. "I am going," I whispered, though I was not sure whether I was speaking to her or to myself. Thomas Whitaker's office sat on King Street above an old stationery shop, in a brick building with tall windows, polished brass numbers, and the quiet dignity of a place that had seen too many families discover that money could turn blood into theater. The city around it smelled of rain, coffee, and old stone. Tourists had not yet filled the sidewalks, and delivery trucks hummed along the curb, as if the world were continuing with a normal morning. I stood outside the door for a moment, my folder clutched against my chest, wondering whether everything would vanish once someone professional looked at it too closely. Maybe I had misunderstood the deed. Maybe Victor was right and I was clinging to grief, building a castle out of one frightened woman's last note. Then the door opened before I knocked, and Thomas Whitaker looked down at me through silver-rimmed glasses. He was tall, lean, and neatly dressed in a gray suit, with white hair combed back and a face that did not waste expression. "Claire-Elise Donovan," he said, not as a question but as confirmation. "You look very much like your grandmother when she was about to do something difficult." I had no defense against that. My eyes burned instantly. "I am trying not to fall apart." "Good," he said, stepping aside. Falling apart is rarely useful before 9 in the morning. His office was lined with law books, framed maps of Charleston County, and photographs of old houses I recognized from preservation articles. On his desk sat a green banker's lamp and a sealed cream folder with my name already written on it. He offered coffee. I declined. He poured me one anyway, black, and set it beside me. "Eleanor said you would say no to help the first time it was offered," he said. "She instructed me to ignore that when reasonable." It was such a grandmother thing to do that I almost laughed. Instead, I handed him the folder from the rose painting. Thomas read the letter first. He did not rush. He gave every line the respect Victor had never given anything that came from a woman's hand unless it was a signature on something he wanted. When he reached the end, he placed the pages flat on the desk, took off his glasses, and looked at me with a kind of seriousness that made my spine straighten. "Everything Eleanor wrote is true." My breath caught, sharp and painful. "The house is really in my name?" "Yes." He opened the sealed folder on his desk and withdrew the original deed transfer, several certified copies, a county recording confirmation, a physician's competence statement, and a set of notarized affidavits. 2 years and 4 months ago, Eleanor Louise Whitmore transferred Rosewood Manor to you through a properly executed warranty deed. It was recorded with Charleston County. The residence, carriage house, greenhouse, garden parcels, and associated household rights are all included. There is no mortgage against the property that Victor controls, no valid lien he can use to force a sale, and no authority giving him the right to evict you. I gripped the arms of the chair. For years, Victor had moved through Rosewood like ownership was a fragrance he wore. He chose which rooms were opened for parties, which family heirlooms were too outdated, which repairs could wait, which bills were a burden, and which memories were inconvenient. And all that time, grandmother had moved the ground beneath him without making a sound. "Why did she not tell me?" I asked. Thomas folded his hands. "Because Eleanor understood pressure. She knew Victor would not need a legal right if he could make you surrender your moral one. She believed that if you knew too soon, he would turn your mother's fear, Vanessa's contempt, and your own guilt into tools. He would convince you that accepting the house meant destroying the family. Eleanor wanted the transfer completed, recorded, and insulated before you had to face him." I looked down at the deed, at my own name typed in black ink. Claire-Elise Donovan. I had spent so many years thinking I had no place to stand, and here was proof that grandmother had given me the entire floor. Victor says the house is too expensive to maintain, I said. Thomas's mouth tightened. Victor says many things when he is trying to access money. He opened a second file. Inside were spreadsheets, bank statements, and printed emails. Eleanor became concerned about Victor's finances 3 years before her death. She asked me to review several documents he had presented to her as estate simplification proposals. They were not simplification. They were gateways to control. Had she signed them, Victor would have gained authority to leverage or sell portions of the property through a family management entity. He wanted her to sign Rosewood away? In stages. Men like Victor rarely call it taking. They call it restructuring. A chill moved through me. And Vanessa? Thomas turned another page. Vanessa introduced Preston Blake to Victor last year. Blake's company specializes in converting historic homes into boutique hospitality properties. Eleanor refused to meet him. After her health declined, Victor appears to have renewed conversations without any legal authority to do so. Can Preston buy the house from him? No, but he may believe Victor can deliver cooperation from you or create enough family pressure to make you sell. My phone buzzed on the desk before I could answer. I glanced down and saw Vanessa's name. The subject line froze the blood in my hands. Updated Rosewood exit plan. Open it, Thomas said. If they sent it to you, intentionally or not, preserve it. I tapped the screen. The email had clearly not been meant for me. Vanessa must have selected my name from the family group by accident, or perhaps she had forwarded the wrong chain in the careless confidence of someone who never expected me to understand anything important. The thread included Victor, Vanessa, Preston Blake, and someone named Marcy from Blake Heritage Properties. Vanessa had written, "She has nowhere to go. Once we shame her enough, she will leave quietly." Victor had replied, "The key is speed. If Claire signs the exit acknowledgement before she speaks to anyone, we avoid delay." Preston had written, "We need a clean path before preliminary investor review. Public family conflict could affect the heritage branding." I stared at the words until they blurred. Heritage branding. Exit acknowledgement. Shame her enough. My life, my grief, my grandmother's house had been reduced to obstacles in a marketing plan. Thomas held out his hand. "May I?" I gave him the phone. He read the thread without changing expression, but when he finished, he looked colder than before. "Forward this to me immediately. Then take screenshots of every message, including dates and recipients." "Is this illegal?" "It is certainly useful," he said. "It shows an organized attempt to pressure you into signing away occupancy or cooperation before acknowledging your recorded ownership. It also suggests Preston Blake may have been aware that Victor lacked a clean path. That makes his position more delicate." I forwarded the email, took screenshots, and backed everything up while Thomas drafted a formal notice to Victor, Vanessa, and Blake Heritage Properties. He did not send it immediately. "There is value in timing," he said. "Victor intends to gather people again, does he not?" I thought of the previous night, the guests, the wine, the way he had turned my humiliation into a public performance. He mentioned a follow-up meeting tonight. He said Preston wanted preliminary signatures before the end of the week. Thomas nodded as if Victor had stepped exactly where grandmother predicted he would. "Then you will attend." My stomach dropped. "Alone?" "Not entirely. I will be nearby. But before papers speak, people often reveal themselves. Let Victor ask you to sign. Let Vanessa insult you. Let Preston present his offer. Do not argue ownership until the proper witnesses are present. You want me to let them humiliate me again? I want you to understand that last night was cruelty. Tonight may become evidence." The difference between those two words changed the room. Cruelty was something I had survived privately. Evidence was something that could turn back on the people who believed there would be no record. Thomas slid a certified copy of the deed across the desk, but kept the originals in his folder. "Take this. Do not show it unless necessary. Say nothing about the recorded deed until I arrive. Most importantly, sign nothing." I almost smiled. Everyone keeps saying that. Because Victor's entire plan depends on your signature or your silence. I stood, holding the certified copy like it was both shield and flame. At the door, Thomas stopped me. "Claire, Eleanor also left a video statement. I would prefer not to use it unless Victor challenges her competence or accuses you of manipulation." My hand tightened on the doorknob. "He will." Thomas's eyes softened for the first time. Yes, she believed he would too. Outside, Charleston had fully woken. Sunlight struck the wet pavement. Church bells rang somewhere in the distance. My phone buzzed again. This time, Victor's message was short. Dinner room, 7 tonight. Bring the sign notice and stop embarrassing your mother. I looked at the words, then at the certified deed in my hand. For the first time in my life, Victor's threat did not make me smaller. It made the truth feel heavier. I typed one sentence back before I could overthink it. I will be there. Then I walked toward my car knowing I was not returning to Rosewood Manor as the unwanted guest he thought he had cornered. I was returning as the owner he had not yet learned to fear. By the time I returned to Rosewood Manor that afternoon, the house had been transformed from a family home into a sales floor. I saw it before I even stepped through the front gate. The extra cars lining the drive, the white rental van parked near the carriage house, the florist unloading tall arrangements of lilies and pale roses as if beauty could disguise betrayal, and Vanessa standing on the front porch in a fitted emerald dress, speaking into her phone with the crisp excitement of a woman preparing to inherit something she had never protected. For one wild second, I wanted to turn the car around, drive back to King Street, and tell Thomas I was not built for this kind of confrontation. Then I looked at the deed copy on the passenger seat, at my own name typed where Victor's certainty had no power. And I understood that courage did not feel like confidence. Sometimes it felt like nausea, a shaking hand, and the decision to open the door anyway. I parked near the side garden instead of the main drive and entered through the greenhouse path, the way I had done 1,000 times when grandmother was alive. The greenhouse windows were fogged with afternoon heat, and inside, the orchids drooped because no one had watered them since I left the night before. That small neglect hurt more than the cars outside. Victor could stage an entire dinner, order flowers, gather investors, and polish his shoes, but he could not remember that living things still needed care. I filled the copper watering can, moved from bench to bench, and gave each plant what it needed before I faced the room full of people who had decided I needed nothing at all. At 6:50, I walked into the main house through the garden door. Voices rolled from the front rooms. The dining room had been rearranged again, the long mahogany table cleared of dinner plates and covered with presentation boards, legal folders, champagne flutes, and a sleek architectural model of Rosewood Manor reimagined as something cold and profitable. Tiny white buildings had been added behind the greenhouse. The carriage house was labeled Private Wellness Cottage. The library was labeled Heritage Lounge. The rose garden was labeled Event Lawn. My grandmother's bedroom wing had been marked Founder Suite, as if turning grief into luxury made it respectful. Preston Blake stood near the model with 2 associates I did not know, both holding tablets. Victor stood beside him in a black suit, his expression relaxed enough to tell me he believed the night was already under control. Vanessa was laughing with Aunt Patricia and 2 distant cousins near the fireplace, accepting admiration as if the hotel had already opened, and her name was on the invitation cards. My mother sat alone by the window, hands folded in her lap, looking at the model with an expression I could not read. When she saw me, her mouth trembled. She looked as if she wanted to stand and as if the habit of sitting had become stronger than the desire to move. Victor noticed me next. "Claire," he said, his voice warm for the room and warning for me. "Good. You came prepared, I hope." Every head turned. There were more people than the night before. Relatives, 2 of Victor's country club friends, Preston's team, a real estate consultant, and Marcy, the woman from the email thread. They all looked polished, expectant, mildly uncomfortable in the way people look when they know they are witnessing a private injury, but have been promised it will benefit them later. I set my purse on a side chair, keeping the certified deed folded in the inner pocket but not touching it. "Prepared to listen," I said. Vanessa smiled. "That is a refreshing change." Victor ignored her, though not because he disapproved. He simply preferred his cruelty with better timing. "We are here," he said, turning to the group, "to move beyond emotion and take the first responsible step toward preserving Eleanor's legacy in a way that is financially sustainable." Preston nodded smoothly. "Blake Heritage Properties specializes in respectful transformations. Rosewood will not be destroyed, it will be elevated." I looked at the architectural model again, at the tiny fake event lawn where grandmother had once knelt in the mud with me during a thunderstorm to stake young rose canes before the wind snapped them. "Elevated," I repeated. "You mean rented by the night?" Preston's smile tightened. "Shared with a wider world." "For a price." Vanessa stepped forward. "Do you have to make everything ugly?" I turned to her. "I am not the one who put a spa cottage where grandmother's greenhouse stands." The greenhouse is falling apart. Because no one but me has maintained it. Exactly, Vanessa said, pouncing on the opening. You have confused doing chores with ownership. That is the whole problem. You watered plants, Claire. You dusted shelves. You sat beside a sick woman and let everyone call you devoted because it sounded better than unemployed. The words struck, but this time I felt Thomas's sentence beneath them. Tonight may become evidence, so I let her speak. I let the room hear her. I let Victor believe silence meant weakness. He took a folder from the table and walked toward me. The same performance from the previous night, refined for a larger audience. This is an exit acknowledgement, he said. It confirms that you understand Rosewood Manor is being prepared for sale discussions, and that you agree to vacate the property within 30 days without obstructing inspections, investor review, or transition planning. Transition planning, I said. Another soft name for pushing me out. Another dramatic interpretation, he replied. You will receive a modest relocation allowance if you sign tonight and cooperate. If you refuse, that offer is withdrawn. My mother's fingers tightened in her lap. Aunt Patricia looked away. Preston's associate Marcy tapped something into her tablet. Victor placed the document on the table and uncapped a pen. Sign it. I did not move. What gives you the authority to make me leave? His face remained composed, but I saw the tiny twitch at his jaw. I am the head of this household. That is not a legal answer. The room shifted. Preston looked from Victor to me. Vanessa gave a brittle laugh. Since when did you become a lawyer? Since people started handing me papers and calling them truth. Victor stepped closer. Do not do this. Ask him, I said, looking at Preston now. Ask Victor what legal document gives him the right to sell this house. Preston's polite expression began to thin. Victor, I was under the impression the family authority was clear. It is clear, Victor snapped, then caught himself and softened his voice. Eleanor's affairs are being handled through family consensus. Claire is attempting to complicate matters because she is grieving. Family consensus does not transfer title, I said. Vanessa's eyes flashed. You do not know anything about title. You barely know how to pay your own taxes. A few people laughed, but not as freely this time. Claire, Victor said, lowering his voice. You are embarrassing your mother. There it was, the old blade. Not you are wrong, not you are cruel, but you are hurting the one person you still want to protect. My eyes moved to Marianne. She looked at me with tears standing in her eyes, and for a moment I almost became the daughter Victor needed me to be. Guilty, obedient, smaller. Then my mother whispered, so softly I almost missed it. Do not sign. The room went still. Victor turned toward her. Marianne. She flinched, but she did not take it back. That single broken whisper did more for me than any speech could have. I looked down at the exit acknowledgement, then back at Victor. No. The word was simple, clean, and final. Vanessa threw up her hands. Unbelievable. Victor's face changed. The mask did not slip all at once. It cracked in pieces. Then I will have the locks changed. Preston took a careful step back. Victor, that may not be advisable until... Stay out of it, Victor said, then pointed at me. You have lived in this house out of charity, Claire. Charity ends when gratitude does. Tonight you will pack a bag. Tomorrow a locksmith comes. If you try to interfere with inspections or speak to investors, I will make sure every person in Charleston knows exactly what you are. A lonely, dependent woman trying to steal importance from a dead grandmother. Vanessa's face glowed with satisfaction. Marcy stopped typing. No one laughed now. I felt strangely calm, as if the worst words had passed through me and found no place left to land. Say that again, I said. Victor frowned. What? That I am trying to steal from a dead woman. Say it clearly. You are unwell, he said. No, I replied. I am making sure I remember this accurately. His eyes narrowed. Get out of this room. Gladly. I picked up my purse but not the pen. Tomorrow morning we are going to talk with real paper. Vanessa snorted. Your magic rose painting again? I looked at her, then at Victor, then at the hotel model sitting where grandmother's dining plates used to be. No, county records. The words landed harder than I expected. Victor's face went blank for half a second, and that half second was enough. He knew, maybe not everything, but enough to fear what I might have found. I walked out before he could recover. In the hallway, my mother caught my wrist. Her hand was cold. Claire, she whispered, shaking. I am sorry. I looked at her, wanting to ask why sorry had taken so long. Why love in our family always arrived after the damage instead of before. But there was no time. Tomorrow, I said. You need to tell the truth tomorrow. Her eyes filled. I will try. No, I said gently. Trying is what got us here. Then I left through the front door, down the steps, past the cars, past the iron gate, and into the humid Charleston night. My phone buzzed before I reached my car. It was Thomas. I heard enough. I have the originals. Tomorrow, 9 a.m. Let him gather everyone. I looked back at Rosewood Manor, glowing with money, fear, and people who still thought I was the one being removed. Then I typed back, bring the video too. At 9 o'clock the next morning, Victor Hale stood in the grand foyer of Rosewood Manor like a man preparing to receive applause. He had gathered everyone again, exactly as Thomas predicted he would. Because public control was the only kind Victor trusted. The dining room doors were open, the hotel model remained on the table, the folders were stacked in perfect rows, and Preston Blake had returned with his associates, though he looked less certain than he had the night before. Vanessa arrived in ivory silk and diamonds, her smile bright and brittle, as if elegance could protect her from whatever she sensed but did not yet understand. My mother sat near the library entrance, pale and silent, both hands wrapped around a cup of tea she had not touched. I entered through the front door instead of the garden door, because this time I was not sneaking back into a house where I had been tolerated. I was walking into my own home with witnesses waiting. Victor's eyes moved over me, taking in my simple black dress, the leather folder in my hand, the calm I had practiced in the mirror, until it almost felt real. Good, he said. You finally decided to handle this properly. Vanessa gave a soft laugh. Maybe she brought her county records. A few people smiled nervously. Preston did not. He watched me as though the words from last night had followed him home and kept him awake. Victor stepped toward me with the exit acknowledgement already in his hand. Claire, before we continue with Mr. Blake's team, I want this settled. Sign the document. We will forget the unfortunate scene from last night. I looked at the paper, then at his face. No. His smile vanished so quickly, it felt like a curtain dropping. This is your last chance to leave with dignity. No, I repeated. This is your last chance to tell everyone what authority you have to sell Rosewood Manor. The room quieted. Vanessa's eyes flashed. You are unbelievable. No, a voice said from behind me. She is correct. Thomas Whitaker stepped through the open front door carrying a black leather briefcase, followed by Daniel Reeves, a senior officer from Palmetto Trust Bank, and a young woman from Thomas's office holding a document box. Thomas looked exactly as he had in his office. Gray suit, silver glasses, no wasted motion. Daniel Reeves wore a navy suit and carried himself with the weary confidence of a man who had spent years watching families discover that bank records did not care about pride. Victor's face tightened. Thomas, he said, this is a private family matter. Thomas did not smile. No, Victor. This is a property ownership matter involving a recorded deed, potential misrepresentation to a buyer, and an attempt to remove the legal owner from her own residence. That makes it very public if handled poorly. Preston Blake slowly set down the folder in his hand. Recorded deed? Vanessa laughed, but it came out too sharp. This is theater. Claire found an old lawyer and now everyone is pretending. Thomas placed his briefcase on the dining table, pushing aside one of Preston's glossy renderings. I knew Eleanor Whitmore for 31 years. She disliked theater unless the tickets were excellent. Then he opened the case and removed a thick folder sealed with a red tab. This is the original warranty deed transferring Rosewood Manor from Eleanor Louise Whitmore to Claire Elise Donovan, executed 2 years and 4 months ago, notarized, witnessed, and recorded with Charleston County. He laid the document on the table. The transfer includes the main residence, the carriage house studio, the greenhouse, the garden parcels, and all appurtenant household rights. Claire Donovan is the legal owner of Rosewood Manor. The room changed in a way I could feel in my skin. Aunt Patricia whispered my name. One of Victor's friends muttered, "Good God." Preston stepped closer, but not to Victor. He stepped toward the paper. Daniel Reeves placed a second set of records beside it. Palmetto Trust Bank confirms there is no active mortgage or ownership interest held by Victor Hale against this property. Mr. Hale is not authorized to sell, encumber, lease, or remove the owner from the premises. Vanessa's face drained of color. That cannot be right. It is right, Thomas said. Victor's voice turned low and dangerous. Eleanor was not competent to make that kind of decision. Thomas opened another folder. She expected you to say that. He placed a physician's statement on the table. Dr. Meredith Calloway evaluated Eleanor Whitmore 3 days before the signing. She was fully oriented, mentally competent, and understood the nature and effect of transferring the property. 2 independent witnesses were present. I was present. The county recorder accepted the filing. There is no defect in the deed, Victor pointed at me. She manipulated a dying woman. My mother made a small broken sound, but Thomas lifted a hand before anyone else spoke. She expected you to say that as well. He nodded to his assistant, who set a tablet on the table. My heart began to pound because I knew what was coming, and yet nothing could have prepared me for seeing grandmother's face appear on the screen. Eleanor Whitmore sat in Thomas's office, wrapped in a pale blue shawl, thinner than she had been in life but with the same clear eyes that once made contractors, doctors, and rude dinner guests straighten their backs. Her voice filled the room, quiet but unmistakably steady. My name is Eleanor Louise Whitmore. I am recording this statement voluntarily. I have transferred Rosewood Manor to my granddaughter Claire Elise Donovan because she is the only person in this family who has loved the house as a home rather than counted it as an asset. My mother began to cry silently. Vanessa looked away. Victor stared at the screen like he could punish the dead for speaking without his permission. Grandmother continued. Victor will likely say I was confused. I was not. He will likely say Claire influenced me. She did not. Claire did not ask me for this house. That is part of why I chose her. She cared for me when there was nothing to gain except exhaustion, worry, and a front row seat to an old woman losing strength. Vanessa may call her dependent. Victor may call her a guest. If they do, remind them that for 2 years they have been living in Claire's house, not the other way around. The sentence struck the room with such force that even Preston's associates stopped pretending to take notes. A cousin covered her mouth. Aunt Patricia whispered. Eleanor knew. The video continued. Rosewood is not to become a hotel for strangers who want to purchase the illusion of history. It is not to be sold to pay for Victor's mistakes or Vanessa's ambitions. Claire may decide its future in her own time, but no one else has that right. And Claire, if you are watching this because they have hurt you, listen to me now. You were never a charity case. You were the one keeping the lights on in rooms they only knew how to admire. Thomas paused the video. For a moment, no one moved. Then Preston turned to Victor, his face hard with controlled anger. Were you aware of this transfer? Victor looked at him. This is a family dispute. That is not what I asked. Vanessa stepped in, desperate. Preston, this is just a delay. Obviously there are ways to challenge. Miss Hale, Daniel Reeves said evenly, there is nothing in the bank's record or county record giving you any claim to this property. Her mouth closed. Thomas removed one more packet from his briefcase. There is also the matter of the email chain mistakenly sent to Claire yesterday. It includes language about securing her signature before she spoke to anyone, shaming her until she left quietly, and avoiding public family conflict before investor review. I advise everyone involved to stop speaking casually about this transaction. Preston's face darkened as his own words came back to stand against him. Blake Heritage Properties is withdrawing immediately, he said. Victor spun toward him. You cannot be serious. I am extremely serious. My company does not purchase property from people who do not own it. He gathered his papers with stiff, efficient movements. And we do not appreciate being exposed to liability by misrepresentations. Vanessa grabbed his sleeve. Preston, wait. He pulled away. Do not contact me again without counsel. Then he and his associates left, taking the hotel model's future with them. Victor remained near the table, surrounded by documents that had turned his authority into dust. He looked at me then, and for the first time in my life, I did not see a powerful man. I saw a trespasser in a good suit. Claire, he said, trying to summon the old voice, the one that could bend my mother and shame me into silence. You do not understand what you have done. I stepped forward and placed grandmother's letter beside the deed. I understand perfectly. I stopped you from selling a house that was never yours. Vanessa's composure finally cracked. You stole everything from us. My mother stood then, shaking but upright. No, she said. Her voice was small, but it was there. Eleanor gave it to her because we all let Victor take too much for too long. Victor turned on her. Marianne, sit down. She flinched, but she did not sit. No. The word was barely louder than breath, but it changed the room more than shouting ever could. Thomas closed his briefcase. Victor, Vanessa, you will vacate the premises by arrangement with council. Until then, you will not remove, destroy, or alter any property belonging to Rosewood Manor. I looked toward the library, toward the wall where the rose painting hung exactly as grandmother had left it, bright and too pink and gloriously defiant. Last night they had called me a guest. This morning, the house had answered for me. For a long moment after Thomas closed his briefcase, no one inside Rosewood Manor seemed to know how to move. The house that had been filled with polished voices, investor language, whispered judgment, and Victor's rehearsed authority became strangely quiet, as if the walls themselves were listening to the silence that came after the truth. Preston Blake was gone. His associates were gone. The glossy hotel renderings still lay across my grandmother's dining table, but now they looked ridiculous, like costumes left behind after actors fled the stage. Victor stood beside them with one hand on the back of a chair, his knuckles pale, his eyes fixed on me with a hatred so controlled it almost looked like dignity. Vanessa had retreated near the fireplace, clutching her phone, her perfect face twisted between disbelief and panic. My mother remained standing, trembling but standing, and that mattered more than I expected. For years, I had measured her love by the time she failed to defend me, but in that room, with Victor's command still hanging in the air and her refusal still alive between us, I saw a woman who had spent too long mistaking survival for peace. Thomas gave Victor until the end of the week to remove his personal belongings and made it very clear that any attempt to alter locks, remove antiques, destroy records, intimidate staff, or contact contractors about Rosewood would be met with immediate legal action. Victor laughed once, a short, ugly sound. "You think paper makes you powerful, Claire?" he asked. I looked at the deed on the table, then at the rose painting beyond the open library doors. "No," I said. "It makes the truth harder for you to erase." That was the last thing I said to him that morning. I did not chase him through the house when he stormed upstairs. I did not answer when Vanessa hissed that I had humiliated the family. I did not comfort relatives who suddenly wanted to tell me they had always known I was Eleanor's favorite, as if silent approval were a gift I should thank them for. I simply gathered grandmother's letter, the certified deed, and the tablet that still held her video statement, and carried them into the library. The room smelled of dust, leather, and roses from the arrangement I had forgotten to remove. I sat beneath the painting that had hidden my future and finally allowed myself to cry, not the helpless tears I had swallowed at dinner, but the exhausted tears of someone who had been holding her breath for years, without realizing it. My mother found me there 20 minutes later. She stood in the doorway like a visitor, asking permission to enter her own past. "Claire," she said softly, "may I sit with you?" I nodded. She crossed the room slowly and sat beside me on the floor, careful not to touch me until I leaned toward her first. For a while, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "I heard him say those things to you for years, and I told myself silence was keeping the family from breaking." Her voice cracked, but silence was the way it broke. I wanted to be generous. I wanted forgiveness to rise in me clean and immediate because that would have made me feel noble. Instead, what rose first was hurt. "I needed you before today," I said. She closed her eyes. "I know. Grandmother knew too. I know that now." She looked at the painting, then at the letter in my lap. "Your grandmother was always braver than I was." "She was not fearless," I said, remembering the thin hand that gripped mine during medical appointments, the nights she whispered that Victor was waiting for weakness. She was just tired of letting fear choose for her. My mother nodded, and for the first time, I believed she understood the difference. The week that followed was not peaceful, but it was honest. Victor hired an attorney who reviewed the deed, the recording, the competence statement, the video, and Thomas's file, then advised him with what must have been painful clarity. There would be no challenge worth pursuing. Vanessa tried to call Preston Blake, but he refused to speak to her without counsel. Within days, the story traveled through Charleston's private circles the way all scandal travels in polite society. Never directly, always with lowered voices, careful phrases, and details too accurate to have come from strangers. Victor stopped appearing at the club. Vanessa deleted every post she had made about preserving family legacy. Blake Heritage Properties issued a formal statement saying they had withdrawn from preliminary conversations regarding Rosewood Manor due to unresolved ownership representations. Thomas smiled when he read that phrase aloud. "Corporate language," he said, "for we were lied to." Victor and Vanessa moved out on Friday beneath a sky heavy with rain. He took his suits, his files, a few pieces of furniture that belonged to him, and none of the power he had once carried through the rooms. Vanessa paused on the porch with 3 designer suitcases beside her and looked back at the columns, the oaks, the windows, the house she had already imagined posing in as hostess of something grand. "You will ruin this place," she said. I stood in the doorway, my arms folded, no longer angry enough to answer in the language she wanted. "No," I said. "I am going to let it breathe." She stared at me as if that were the stupidest thing she had ever heard, then got into Victor's car and left. After they were gone, Rosewood did not suddenly become easy. Houses like that do not reward sentiment without demanding labor. The roof needed inspection. The greenhouse needed glass panels replaced. The carriage studio needed wiring brought up to code. The garden irrigation system was older than some of my cousins. Bills arrived with numbers that made me understand why Victor had used maintenance as a weapon. But Thomas helped me transfer the household accounts properly. Daniel Reeves connected me with a preservation finance advisor, and for the first time, decisions about Rosewood were made by people who wanted the house to survive, not by people trying to squeeze money from its bones. I reopened the east rooms first, then grandmother's bedroom, not as a shrine, but as a room that deserved sunlight. My mother stayed for a while. At my invitation and under conditions we discussed like adults. She began therapy in town. She started answering Victor's messages only through her attorney. Some mornings, she helped me in the garden without speaking much, and that quiet felt different from the old silence. It felt like repair, slow and imperfect, but real. 3 months after the deed was revealed, I stood in the greenhouse while workers installed the final new panes above us. Sunlight poured through clean glass onto rows of young roses, orchids, herbs, and trays of seedlings. On the central table lay plans for what Rosewood would become. Not a hotel, not a museum for wealthy strangers, not a monument to the Whitmore name. Rosewood House would become a preservation and design center, a place for workshops in historic restoration, floral design, interior repair, garden care, and financial independence for women who had been taught to feel grateful for rooms they were never allowed to own. The carriage studio became my design office. The library hosted the first lecture series. The greenhouse became a classroom. The rose garden, the same one Preston had labeled Event Lawn, became Eleanor's garden, open twice a month to local students and community groups. On opening day, I placed grandmother's letter in a glass case inside the library, beside a small sign that read, "A home is not protected by walls alone. It is protected by the person brave enough to tell the truth." My mother stood beside me when the first guests arrived. She squeezed my hand, and this time she did not let go when people looked at us. Near sunset, after everyone had left, I walked alone to the front gate. A new brass plaque had been mounted there that morning. Rosewood Manor, home of Claire Elise Donovan, preserved in honor of Eleanor Louise Whitmore. I touched the letters of my name and thought about the night Victor had called me a guest who had stayed too long. He had believed humiliation could push me out before truth could find me. Vanessa had believed worth belonged to whoever looked most expensive in the room. Preston had believed history could be purchased if the branding was tasteful enough. But grandmother had known something they did not. Roots are quiet, but they are not weak. They hold beneath the surface until the storm arrives, and when everything else bends, they decide what remains standing. I turned back toward the house, its windows glowing gold in the evening light, the roses moving softly in the wind, the library waiting behind the pink painting, and I finally understood that Rosewood had never been my reward for suffering. It was my responsibility after surviving. And if this story touched your heart, tell me in the comments what you would have done if you were standing in Claire's place. Would you forgive the family that humiliated you? Or would you protect your peace and walk forward without them? If you believe truth always finds its way to the surface, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay with us for the next powerful story, because sometimes the people they call weak are the very ones holding the whole legacy together.